Good evening. Welcome to this week's contemporary halacha shir. The title in honor of Pesach, which is not very far away, is Ashkenazim eating with Sefardim on Pesach, which I don't know if you've thought about it, but it's a fascinating topic. Of course, there are slightly different rules regarding kashrus and what you can and cannot eat for Ashkenazim and Sefardim on Pesach. And of course, that Sefardim are able to eat kidneys. We'll explain what that is. And what happens if you have an Ashkenazi man who is married to a Sephardi woman, and they want to go to, they want to eat at her parents over Pesach, and they very happily eat kidneys. They eat rice and all these things. How does that work? So is that allowed? That is okay? What are the do's and don'ts? So let's take a bit of a step back and look at the background. What is kidneys, and why is there this chumrah, which is what it is, it's a stringency, that we don't eat it for Ashkenazim? So it says the Mishnah Berurah in Siman Tofnun Gimel Sif Cotton Vav. This is the first box on the handout. If you're listening online, please email me at j.golker@gmail.com. I'll send you the handout, or go to torahtoday.org, and hopefully it'll all be up there. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Chovetz Chaim, Tam Chumrah Zu. The reason for this chumrah is mishum, because shelif amim tavua mu'urav b'minei kidneys. Sometimes, and he's going to give three reasons. Sometimes the tfuah, which means chitim and so'orim, because we know that chometz can only be made out of the 5 grains, which is the flour from the 5 grains, which is mixed with water. And sometimes the tfuah, the produce, is of murav b'minei kidneys. You can have chitim and so'orim, which are mixed up with beans, which are not. They don't have the potential to become chometz. V'yef shlevari yofa, and it's not clear to differentiate between the different types of products. And then sometimes you can cook them together and not knowing that one is actually grains of wheat or barley, and others are not, and you'll confuse them together and you'll mix them up. And furthermore, sometimes you grind them into flour. Sometimes you can make bread out of flour made from these things. Or bein pas lepas shel minei dogon. And therefore people will confuse it. They get confused between potato flour, regular flour from wheat and barley, and therefore that therefore Chazal long time ago made a takana not to eat kidneys, not to eat any bread or any food product made out of rice, of kidneys and beans, shlemus. That's the second reason. Gamkein osru mishum lo plug. And therefore they asked it, that's the low plug. We don't differentiate between the different types of grains. V'oid, the dilma nimtze bohem garinin shel minei dogon, and sometimes you can have, bits of flour and grain which could get mixed up with kidneys. Imagine you go to Machane Yehuda, the shuk, and you buy a bag of beans or some rice. You've got lots of sacks of different products there. It's not unlikely that you can have a little bit of flour coming along with your rice, that it gets mixed up. If the seller is busy and he uses the handle or the spoon for one or the other, or a bit falls in. And therefore, because of that, Chazal made a gezerah that we don't eat kidneys. Now, what exactly is kidneys? It includes lots of things. It includes rice, beans, lentils, peas, sesame seeds, mustard, chickpeas, soybeans, and it can actually have wide application in terms of what we eat. Now, this was only taken on in the Ashkenazi world. The Sefardi poskim, the Sefardi Rishonim and Achronim never really were concerned about this. They never took on this particular chumrah, and moreover, it only includes foods where we had the minhag when the minhag was established. So things that came along which are similar, that came along afterwards, doesn't include that. So, for example, potatoes. You could make the same argument why potatoes should be deemed as kidneys. Potato flour could be confused with wheat and barley flour. Coffee, nuts, these sort of things, and yet we do not include them. So only the things which Chazal were worried about, the kidneys, the rice, the peas, and the chickpeas, and things like that, are included in kidneys. Okay, that's the background. Now, one more important background introduction, and that is the Ramah. The Ramah is the champion of kidneys, and he says in Hilchas Pesach, Siman Tov Nun Gimel Sif Aleph, Haminig ba'Ashkenaz lahachmir ve'ein l'shanis. This is, we are machmir in Ashkenaz to avoid kidneys, ve'ein l'shanis, and we shouldn't deviate from this minhag. And the Mishnah Berurah, however, says there are room for leniencies in extenuating circumstances. So says the Mishnah Berurah there in Sif Kotten Zayin, ve'ein l'shanis, va'afilu ba'achron shel Pesach, even on the last day of Pesach, which of course is only midrabanan, it's not min haTorah, it's 7 days min haTorah. Gamkin ein lahakel b'zeh, therefore you shouldn't bring out the rice on the last day of Pesach. There is no room for leniency for Ashkenazim then. Umikal makom b'shas hatchak. However, in extenuating circumstances, she'ein la'adam alechel, he hasn't got what to eat, mut levashel kol haminim chutz mehem dagon. He's allowed to. For example, a person is not well. I remember many years ago, one of our kids had some intolerances for certain foods, and the only formula milk that the baby could have was a soya product, which of course is kidneys. And there I remember speaking to Dayan Lapin Zatzal, and he said, for sure, no problem, just keep the kalim separate. And we had the soya, the formula that was needed. Or Pashat, says the Mishnah Berurah, du adin l'chayla. So too for a person who is unwell, av she'ein b'sakana, even though it's not life-threatening, the mutal avashal le'en tzarech lezeh. If he needs kidneys products, he's allowed to have it. And at the tzarech livdek v'liver yafa yafa b'dikduk heitev shleim sugam garine mehemin dogon. There are the 5-minute dogon. You've got to just be sure that you haven't got any of that in it, and then a chola could have that. Now, the big question is kalim. In other words, I understand there's a very clear split between Ashkenazim and Sefardim. Ashkenazim avoid kidneys, Sefardim have it. There are extenuating circumstances for a chola or the like. But what about blias? What about the kalim? The example we had, that an Ashkenazi man is married to a Sephardi woman, and we'll see soon how it works in terms of the minhagim that they take on. But what about them eating at her parents', where they very happily have kidneys? Is that allowed? And if it's not allowed, what about eating there, just avoiding the kidneys, but having other food items which have been cooked in pots and pans which have used or been used for kidneys? So how does that work? So Rabbi Yosef has a very interesting tshuva in Yechavadas, that's the bottom of the page, and he is lenient for 3 reasons. Let's take a look. V'hinei, haRamah, this is in Chelek Hey Siman Lamed Beis. Hinei haRamah b'Hagah Kosov, this is the above Ramah. Sha'adav pashat, this is the wrong, different Ramah. Sha'adav pashat she'em naflu kidneys l'toich hatavshel b'Pesach einem oishim hatavshel b'diavad. Amazingly, the Ramah writes that if kidneys falls in, it's bottle. We apply the concept of bittul on Pesach. So some rice falls into your Pesach dish, whatever it is, it's bottle, and the tavshel, the product, is mutzah b'diavad. Va'af al pi shebeshal shuvas trumas hadeshen, even though the trumas hadeshen were a very early source, mash mekatzash tzorech shishim, he implies that really you need shishim, v'rakin osim b'mashu, and it's just that we don't answer it with a mashu, kashan chometz Pesach, she'osu b'kolshu, because of course Pesach is bottled with a mashu. Ha'ika gadas haRamah kimin shebelav hochi ein ze medina lechumra v'harchoka ba'alma. At the end of the day, kidneys is just a chumra and is a harchoka ba'alma. Lochein kol sheyesh roiv hetzer b'teilim, and therefore if there's roiv hetzer, you just don't have to need 60. It's actually bottled b'roiv, and therefore if you've got the majority is non-kidneys, then it's bottled b'roiv, and you would be okay. V'chein das ha'achronim, and that is the opinion of many achronim. V'chein posku ha'chai adam, v'mishnah Berurah, etc. Ulefi ze hadava bara she'em plitas ha'kelim she'bishlu ben eres v'kidneys oseres hatavshel l'bnei Ashkenaz. The absorptions in the kelim, in the pots and in the plates, is not going to be so significant that l'bnei Ashkenaz, for us Ashkenazim she'anagim l'hachem ba'eres v'kidneys, the way machmin don't eat ores and kidneys, rice and beans. Even if the kalim were used that day, and therefore the absorptions are still fresh, says the Rabbi Yosef that yesh lahatir. Shebevada yesh roiv heter keneged plitas hakalim, because whatever I'm eating, the piece of chicken or the potato kigel or whatever it is definitely going to be bottled from the absorbed taste of kidneys in the pots. Benidin didan she'ekem menias ores v'kidneys v'Pesach ein elaminig b'derech chumra v'archok ba'alma kanal yesh lahakol plitas hakalim gam nidan. And therefore Rabbi Yosef says he is lenient for various reasons. Number one, because even the Ramah, who champions the Isser of Kitnius, says if rice is mixed in its bottle, and therefore it's only regular chometz which is not bottled. That's number one. Number two, Kitnius is not chometz, of course, it's just a chumrah, and you therefore don't need to be strict for kelim. And then there's a third reason. If you look at the top of the next page, this is basically some German Jews had a custom to eat a certain type of chelev, and he says that basically the pots were okay, and therefore we can apply that over there. It's ayin sham, and therefore in conclusion that the Rabbi Yosef is lenient. Now, what is contemporary practice? So, first of all, the Halicha Shlomo, Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, he says, this is in Moed Yashon and Nisan, in Perek Dalet Halacha Chof, Ish ve'ish Hashem mesuras havoseihem shonos. What happens if you have a couple? And they have different customs. So, for example, you have an Ashkenazi guy and a Sefardi wife. Which way does it go? Can they eat rice over Pesach? So, the wife always takes on the minhagim of the husband, bein lekokel, bein lahachmer. Says Reb Shlomo Zalman that the wife takes on the chumras, the minhagim of the husband, whichever way it goes. So, for example, if the husband is Ashkenazi, that's a chumrah. So she will not be able to eat kitnius, which she has done so for all the years. And if it's the other way around, if the Ashkenazi wife marries a Sephardi husband, then it's a kula. Now, there are others who are more machmir than that. In Ashri Ish, Rabbi Yashav is more machmir. But I think the mainstream practice is like Reb Shlomo Zalman says, and that is you are noheg according to, if a woman marries a husband and they have different practices, then the wife takes on the practice, the minhagim of the husband. The aunt. Now, the interesting thing is, what about Hataras Nadarim? What about a situation where an Ashkenazi wife marries a Sephardi husband, and according to Shlomo Zalman, she therefore takes on his minhagim, and she can now happily eat rice? Does she need to do Hataras Nadarim? Hataras Nadarim is where you have to undo a vow, and a good practice, even if you didn't articulate it in the nature of a vow, but it's a good practice, it's Hanhoga Tova. Does she need to do Hataras Nadarim? Says Reb Shlomo Zalman, ve'ena tzricha Hataras Nadarim. In the footnotes, he says over there, to kiven da'asid ish l'nosi lebal. Interesting, why not? Because me'ekara ein chan laleh chiv min hogi beisav ela ad she'as t'nosi lebailo. She really, the taking on this practice of not eating kidneys for this Ashkenazi woman was on the understanding that she's only going to do so until the wedding if she marries a Sephardi. So therefore, it was never really. It was like an inbuilt sort of time lapse, if you like, to it. And therefore, Reb Shlomo Zalman says 2 points. Number one, that the woman will take on the minhagim of the husband, and number two, bein lahaka bein lahachmer, and number two, that if she does now begin eating kidneys, because she's married a Sephardi, then she does not even need Hataras Nadarim. Now, Rabbi Yashav also adds in Ashri Ha'ish, this is in Perek Nuntes, this is in not what I've called the sheet, but in Halacha Daled, he says the B'shas Hatchak Ashkenazim can be lenient to eat the food cooked in an Eina Ben Yom Kidneys pot. In other words, don't use the pot for 24 hours and then cook with that. And an example will be if you're in a guest in a Sephardi's home, and they will be offended if you try to explain it to them, then there is definitely room for leniency. Some say that it's initially permitted for an Ashkenazi to eat in a Sephardi home on Pesach and just don't eat the kitnias that are being served, and that's clearly what we've seen in Rabbi Yosef. Others say that unless it's a close relative or in-laws or something like that, and it can easily be avoided, you should try and avoid it to just avoid the whole scenario of even using kalim that have been used for kitnias. So there you have it. Just to summarize, what have we said? The background minhag of not eating kidneys for Sefardim is essentially based on 3 reasons. Number one, that kidneys is sort of harvested and processed in the same manner as chometz. Number 2, that when it's ground into flour and baked just like chometz, people might mistakenly believe that they can eat kidneys and also eat chometz. And also there could be chometz grains mixed into the grains from the kidneys. It includes rice, beans, lentils, sesame, chickpeas, and things like that. That's why, in an Ashkenazi home, you're not going to have any hummus, you're not going to have any mustard made from mustard seeds, and these sort of things. And one has to be careful when you look on packets. Sometimes in tiny writing it says "La'achle kidniyot belvad," so one has to be very careful. Sometimes the writing is tiny. But and then it only includes those foods which were initially included in the minhag, but not potatoes, coffee, nuts, which came along much later. Even though logically it could be included, you'd have thought it would be included in it. The Mishnah Berurah says very clearly that it does not extend to cholim, and if a cholim therefore needs to eat kidneys, isn't able to do so, preferably with separate pots. And regarding kalim and things like that, Rav Yosef is lenient as discussed. Rav Shlomo Zalman says that when a man and woman get married, they have different practices. The minhag olam is that the wife takes on the minhagim of the husband, and she doesn't even need to have Torah and Darim in a situation where she, is now has to, now is able to eat kidneys. And there are different opinions about that, but that's generally the minhag olam. That is the contemporary practice.